one thing we did for the last couple of years was survive COVID, same as everybody else, basically. So, we were sort of, I think we actually did a lot more than a lot of people because we're tech savvy and we all live on the internet. But
yeah, Zoom meetings.
But yeah, I mean, basically, we pivoted to doing Zoom virtual meetings for about 2 years there and keeping our normal monthly meetups going. They've now started up again at Cat Factory again in person, and they still seem to be attended by people. So we still seem to have a community here in Austin who likes we exist and appreciates what we do. Probably the biggest political activism we've done since then. We've been pretty involved in because there's a big debate here going on in Austin right this moment around whether the city should bring back its automated license plate reader program, and we've been involved pretty heavily with a coalition of other groups here in town trying to defeat that.
This time on the Plutopia podcast, our friends from EFF-Austin, Kevin Welch and Chris Boyne join John and Scoop for a lively discussion of technology, past, present, and future. We begin with John's history of EFF-Austin, followed by computer and internet nostalgia, phone phreaking, encryption, open source software, license plate readers, and location data brokers.
Well, we should talk about EFF-Austin.
I guess we should. That's a big topic, though.
It is a big topic. I was going to start by being hysterical. I'm sorry, historical, and talking about. So EFF-Austin was formed right after the National Electronic Frontier Foundation. And the way that happened was that, I know you guys have heard this before. Steve Jackson Games was raided by the U.S. Secret Service at the direction of a prosecutor named Bill Cook in Chicago, Illinois. And, there's probably a pretty interesting story behind the fact that somebody in Chicago ordered a raid in Austin, Texas, but I don't really know exactly how that worked myself. If I reread the hacker crackdown, it's probably in there.
It is.
Well, tell me, do you remember?
So, not the details, but basically a U.S. prosecutor has nationwide authority to go after anyone that they think has committed a crime in any jurisdiction. So, yeah.
So we should talk about the crime, which was that a guy named Lynn Rose, who I think he used the handle Terminus. Was it Terminus? Anyway, he hacked into Bell South's system and downloaded a document about their 911 system.
Yep.
It was a document that you could actually obtain for $10 or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's not like it was that obscure, but at the time, people who were referred to themselves as hackers made sport of hacking into systems and finding things and downloading them and sharing them around to show, kind of like trophy, right?
Oh.
So it was, I once compared this to a panty raid, basically, if you know what those are.
Yeah,
Okay.
I remember that from the film.
Oh yeah, from the film that Emmanuel Goldstein made.
Yes.
What was the name of that movie? I can't even remember, and I was interviewed for that movie.
With Bruce Sterling, no less.
Freedom Downtime? Was that
Yes.
it?
That's
Okay.
it.
Yeah, Sterling and I were talking, and I brought up that panty raid idea. And, it's kind of like that. You go and get something and show it off. And the way that Lynn Rose showed it off, he was a member of a group of, kind of a loose group of people who, were computer savvy and referred to themselves or thought of themselves as hackers. It was called the Legion of Doom, and they had a kind of newsletter called FRAC, PHRACK. So this 9/11 document was included in that newsletter and shared around. And copies of that newsletter went to various places, including Steve Jackson Games, because another guy, Lloyd Blankenship, who was also part of the Legion of Doom, worked at Steve Jackson Games. And this prosecutor, I guess, was kind of tracking where the issues of frack had gone. And since Steve Jackson Games was one of those places, for some reason they got into their heads that it was some kind of hive of criminal hackers. And the Secret Service showed up. They went to Lloyd's apartment, I think it was, or wherever he was living, and mentioned that they were going to break the door down at Steve Jackson Games. He said, "No, don't do that. I've got a key. I'll open it," you know. So he went over, opened the door. They went in. They took computers. They took all kinds of materials from Steve Jackson Games. Now, Steve Jackson published role-playing game books, a book that basically included sort of rules and framework for a role-playing game. If you don't know what a role-playing game is, Dungeons and Dragons is an example. It's like you basically have a fictional scenario and you kind of play at it in real life.
And he still does publish them, as far as I know, with his company.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was one that he was working on that was, I think it was called GURPS Cyberpunk. GURPS was GURPS for Generic User Role-Playing System, I think it was.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And the Secret Service found this thing there, and they said, "Well, we just found a manual for computer crime." So they were really, convinced that they had stumbled onto something. Of course, they had not. They had just broken into somebody's place of business, and it turns out illegally confiscated machines that had private emails on them.
Are you implying the books might be fictional, John, and not reflect what we're going to go out and do? That seems a stretch.
That is correct. So what happened after that was Steve was, of course, he had no idea why he had been raided, pretty freaked out about it. At the time, the internet wasn't much of a thing, but people were pretty active on bulletin board systems. And he went to another bulletin board system and mentioned what had happened. And a couple of people on that BBS, which was called SMOF for Secret Masters of Fandom, had connections. Bruce Sterling knew some people, including some of the people who were at that time starting to put together the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Mitch Kapoor and John Barlow and John Gilmore, etc. And Bruce sent some info to those guys by postal mail, I think. And at the same time, Mike Godwin, who was a member of SMOF BBS, was being hired as the first counsel for EFF. And he had heard firsthand what had happened at Steve Jackson Games. So the Electronic Frontier Foundation had formed specifically because they could see how bad law could emerge from misunderstanding of technology, bad policy. And that was one of the things that they wanted to tackle. And this was like a case study. This was exactly the kind of thing that they were concerned about. So they adopted this as kind of their first big project, this case, where Steve ultimately, once it became clear what had happened, Steve sued the Secret Service and he won. He sued the Secret Service with the help of the Electronic Frontier Foundation on his case. And it became a case that sort of got the word out about the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF. So it was good for EFF. It was good for Steve. It was kind of bad for the Secret Service because they had really screwed up. And what happened after that was that because the Electronic Frontier Foundation initially was planning to be a chapters organization, sort of like Sierra Club with local chapters around the country. Because they had that in mind, Steve immediately suggested that the Alpha chapter of EFF should be in Austin, Texas, and that he would work to put that together. And he got the blessing to do that. Okay, invited a bunch of people out to his place of business, Steve Jackson Games, and had a picnic where people showed up with all kinds of food. It was like kind of a potluck picnic. And at some point, Steve climbed onto a picnic table and gave a kind of rousing speech and said, you know, we're going to form this chapter and we're going to put a board together and we're going to, we're going to be the first chapter of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And I was one of the people who volunteered to be on the initial board of directors of EFF-Austin, as it was called. And we met for like a year after that, putting the thing together. There's really a lot. There's a whole big story there, including in 1992, a meeting that some of us went to in Georgia, at Georgia Tech, where Electronic Frontier Foundation was going to come together with several local groups around the country, especially EFF-Austin, but also others, that all wanted to be chapters of EFF. But EFF had just gone into a retreat just before this meeting. And in that retreat, they decided to move away from the community development mission that they had, the idea of building a community of activists, and moved more in the direction they had hired Jerry Berman as their director. And Jerry Berman was, he was an activist who worked in DC to get policies and get policy change. And Jerry thought that was the wrong way to go. He thought that it would make more sense for them to become a Washington lobby than to become a national like chapters organization. So they abandoned the idea of having chapters. They blessed everybody. They told us at EFF-Austin that we could keep the name EFF. We could keep EFF in our name. They told other organizations that they should just use EF for like Electronic Frontiers Georgia or Electronic Frontiers Alabama. So there were a bunch of these groups that formed a network. That was kind of the idea that came down and said, you guys don't need us to tell you how to run your organizations. You should run them the way you want to. Oh, and by the way, we're not going to give you any money. That was another part of it. But you can create your organizations and we'll just network with you and we'll just be one of the organizations in this network. And that is what sort of transpired and went on for many years. And we variously did projects together, and they hired somebody to be sort of like the contact for all of the various groups. Initially, that was Stanton McCandlish. So that's how EFF-Austin came to be. And that was like 92. So that's like 30 years ago. And here we still are. And we're still active. And Kevin is the president. Chris is the treasurer. I am a member of the board, but and I'm a former president. I was president for I was president twice, and the last time I was president for like 15 years until I twisted Kevin's arm really hard.
I mean, I've been doing it for 7, John. You want it back?
Well, has it been that long? No, I don't want it back.
Not 7, maybe 6, but it has been a while.
Well, John, listening to your description of the raid, I think it would have turned out a lot different if the guy with the key had just let the damn Secret Service kick in the door. That's how they work. He stepped on their turf, and they don't have a sense of humor that they're aware of.
They do like to kick in doors, don't they?
Yeah. So,
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't really understand to this day. I don't understand what they thought they were looking for. Well, I mean, I kind of do because of the result of the search and that statement about the manual for computer crime. What it really said, though, is that they didn't know anything about the technology. They didn't know anything about hackers. They didn't know anything about anything. And that was exactly the problem that EFF was created to address.
I mean, I can only think they must not have known, even though it does sound ludicrous that anybody could think Cyberpunk GURPS was a computer crime manual. But then again, they were all incredulously repeating in mainstream news stories that the famous hacker Kevin Mitnick could literally look at a computer and hack it. So they clearly had a lot of delusions about what was and wasn't possible.
So I have kind of an interesting perspective on this because I was the original generation of kids with a computer whose parents didn't know what I was up to. And I had an Apple II with an Ovation AppleCat modem in 1982. And there was a magazine that was like Boardwatch, but way predated Boardwatch, that you could pick up at Radio Shacks and electronic surplus shops and things like that. And I was very much into that whole thing in the very early 80s. And so Houston also had a very large LATA where you could make a lot of free phone calls. So I dialed up. There were over 1,000 BBSs in the Houston area, and I dialed up all of them. And shortly before, like 3 or 4 months before the Operation Sun Devil raids, I had dialed up the LOD affiliate BBS in Houston. And I'm looking around, and it's like, oh wow, they got a lot of interesting stuff on the telephone network in here. And I wound up going into telecommunications and internet stuff after college, and I was already interested in it at that time. And so I read a bunch of stuff, and you couldn't download stuff very easily in those days. But I read it, looked at it, thought, oh wow, this is great. Called them up a bunch of times, and I was like, oh my goodness, is the Secret Service going to come after me? What are my parents going to think? Because they had no idea.
And did they come after you?
No, they did not.
I mean, kids, getting up to things on the internet is a tradition that continues. I definitely might have used a lot of various file downloading and torrent applications back in the day to get all kinds of things that I was interested in and wanted to see.
Back in the early 70s, when I was working in radio in Houston at KPFT, we got all sorts of contacts from people who were really into the phone freak movement.
Oh, yeah.
And they were sending me all sorts of schematics for, doing my black box, my blue box, and God knows what. And I remember even in the 60s, if you saw the movie War Games, Matthew Broderick goes into a payphone, takes the cover off the mouthpiece,
right,
uses a beer pull tab to ground it against the box. I mean the phone.
The phone box. Yeah.
And he gets a dial tone. And I did that. That saved me so much money in college. Because poor old Southwestern Bell, I was up there at the University of North Texas. It was North Texas State in those days.
Yeah.
And you could do that. And they had little strings with a pull tab on it. That was the equivalent of having the string tied around the quarter. And all you had to do was ground it out. You got a dial tone.
I'm a bored, mildly depressed teenager who, back then it was like DVDs were like, in today's money, $30 a pop. I don't have money, you're not going to tell me that I'm not going to watch that movie I want to see.
In 1993, that it was like the second or third meeting, conference on computers, freedom, and privacy, the CFP conference that a bunch of us used to go to, and it was held in San Francisco. And there were a bunch of really young, like hacker kids that showed up for this, in addition to, lawyers, policymakers, all kinds of people were there. All the EFF people were there. And I remember one night going into town for dinner, and we were walking down the street and saw Emmanuel Goldstein and a bunch of these kids gathered around a payphone, and they were having a 2600 meeting with other groups, and all the groups were like going to payphones and basically like hacking the payphone to be in this meeting.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is like the perfect thing to run across when you're at the CFP conference.
I can't remember where I saw the interview, but I saw an interview one time, and when Steve Jobs had recently exited Apple, I think it was, and Steve Wozniak, and Wozniak made the best blue box in Northern California, and Steve, the consummate sales dude, was talking about how great their blue boxes were. And, so it's like, Wozniak would build the blue boxes and Steve would go out and peddle them. And I really wish I could find that, because it was like, that was the synergy that really started Apple Computer. And they both spoke so fondly of those days, when they were low-level criminals.
I was a worshiper of Captain Crunch.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that was magic. I mean,
yeah,
I was seriously impressed. I mean,
you ever meet Captain Crunch?
That was the Cracker Jack whistle.
He came through Austin a couple of times. We hung out some. Very interesting guy. We published an issue of Fringeware Review. I had interviewed Phil Zimmerman, who was the creator of PGP, Pretty Good Privacy.
I saw that article you linked. Yeah, that was pretty.
Yeah, we put that article in that issue of Fringeware Review, and we had a picture of Captain Crunch, the cereal box Captain Crunch, on the cover, and I called the article "Internet Code Ring."
Yeah, well, and his legacy lives on, because you now have PGPP, Pretty Good Phone Privacy, which is Bruce Schneier's new private phone network project.
I heard of that.
Oh, that's nice. Tell us more about that.
I don't know too much about it, other than that Bruce Schneier's involvement tells me it's probably not a scam, unlike a lot of privacy projects.
Can you see this?
I can't.
There it is.
Yeah, that's nice. Well, PGP saved, back when I was at Kaiser Permanente's IT group in Pleasanton, California, we were trying to move the company out of the dark ages, and it was very hard with a big organization like that. And we had data we needed to send to a group in Phoenix, and I kept going. They had us using an analog modem to just transmit a file, over a phone line to their analog modem that would receive the file. I kept going, we have a great internet connection. All you need is PGP to, encrypt this stuff, and it'll be safe. You almost had to get a letter from the Pope to get them to go along with this. It had been out for quite a while, but going through the corporate hierarchy, it's like, that sounds dangerous. It's like, well, it's dangerous using that analog modem on a phone.
But what if we lose the key somewhere?
So what year was that, Scoop?
That was like 1999, I think.
Oh, see, it should have just gotten frame relay service from MCI.
What, Chris? You probably know the answer to this. What version of SSL were we on in 1999?
Let me think. In 99, probably 1 dot something. I remember when Netscape, I think it was still Netscape at the time, announced SSL, because it was interesting working at MCI in the early 90s, because MCI was a large part of the internet backbone, and that they provided a lot of the DS3 and OC3 circuits that ran, that carried a lot of the internet traffic. But it wasn't until 1995. I started working for the company in 93, and they had all these big, huge contracts to provide all these DS3 and OC3 services. And it wasn't until 1995 that I actually got the ability to have an IP address on my work PC, even though MCI had the internet running through its fibers.
Was you getting that ability because they finally added dynamic host configuration
No,
protocol?
DHCP didn't exist at that point.
Okay.
You had to have static IP addresses.
Okay.
But there was just a real nervousness in the IT and security teams to actually let people have internet access.
Oh,
And
really?
Don't let them on the internet. It's dangerous on there.
And so if you had an IP address on your machine, it was what we would call today a public IP address, because network address translation also did not exist at that time.
It was not hidden behind a submask. The internet could talk to it.
No, it couldn't, because they had these huge checkpoint firewalls in place. And I think they only had 2 exit points. They had one that was somewhere like in Tennessee, and then they had one that was in DC, and in the DC area, Ashburn probably. But it was just kind of crazy. I mean, we got all this internet traffic, but we can't get to it.
Yeah, corporate fear has done a big disservice to the whole IT industry, just by being afraid to be the first one to try it. What happened to that old American spirit? Let's just go and see if it works.
Well, just the number of years we had to waste because they were so afraid of open source software, like finally everybody's embraced it, but the amount of recoding of basic problems that dozens of companies duplicating each other's work because of that, just the efficiency part of me gets annoyed.
Yeah,
I don't know. But it was a pretty long time ago that open source was, at least where I was hanging out, there was pretty decent acceptance of open source in the state. Yeah. I had worked for a big state agency at one time, and we had a big like EFF-Austin had a big meeting with people at the Department of Information Resources, DIR, here in Texas.
DIR well.
Yeah, so we went to DIR. I wish that Susie was here. Her aunt was the director of DIR at one time. But we had a meeting there about open source software, and they were very interested in it. The state was moving toward using more open source software, partly as a cost issue,
Yeah, our group was able to get a little bit of open source software in place simply by making the case, it's going to save you money, boss. It's like, duh. So after that, it's like, yeah, let's get some more of that open source stuff.
My first real job out of college was at a company that built SNA to TCP IP gateways. And so one of the things that they let you do was telnet from a Unix workstation to an IBM-based mainframe. So lots of very big companies were very interested in being able to do that, because these internet protocols were cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
Because, guess what? Because you've got this thing, and they supported a huge number of operating systems. I mean, Sun, Apollo, I can't even remember the old HP systems. But I mean, if there was some company that was interested in getting TN3270 working, they gave a computer to build it on and test it on. And so we had literally hundreds of different Unix-based workstations, and they almost all ran some flavor of System 5 or BSD. And it was really, really interesting to be there at that time, because AT&T and University of California, Berkeley were still big best buddies at that point. And they were sharing source code back and forth, and cross compiling and this and that and the other thing. And so it's like, I never knew a commercial environment that wasn't based on open source-ish software. And because it's like, then they had the big falling out between AT&T and BSD, and then Berkeley Software Distribution Unix stream was born, and life was good.
Yeah, I mean, I will just say a lot of places I've worked, so many companies are basically all in on like the Windows world, which is much better now that Microsoft has gotten much friendlier to open source. But yeah, any company or shop who's gone really all in on the Windows world, you definitely, at least back in the day, you would have a lot of fun proprietary antics and fun.
So the place I work currently is heavy Windows, Microsoft based. And I accidentally typed SSH blah, blah, blah host in a command window. And I got the thing from SSH saying, do you want to accept this host key? I'm like, WTF? I've logged into this thing thousands of times. Why are you asking? Oh, wait a minute. You mean the command window and the PowerShell windows in Windows now understand SSH?
That same thing happened to me the other day.
Well, yeah, because I mean, actually, Windows it continues to expand the Windows subsystem for Linux, the WSL. So yes, you no longer have to download Git Bash to get all that fun natively.
Right. But
I mean, it's a problem if you have a lot of proprietary systems that can't talk to each other. It really is. So sooner or later, it's inevitable that there's affordances, at least,
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean,
some kind of integration.
Well, a big problem. I mean, and I know this because I worked at the state for a while, and there was a lot of legacy Microsoft products. But like before Microsoft embraced DOCX as a standard, the old just DOC extensions were proprietary, and good luck reverse engineering those dang things. Unlike DOC, which is just a zip file in disguise and has a bunch of XML schemas in it around your documents. Simple, standardized, open source standards. But before they did DOCX, it's like, I to this day don't entirely know what's in that dang file.
Yeah.
What was it? There was an open source version of the Microsoft suite, and I'm
LibreOffice. LibreOffice.
Yeah, absolutely. I still use that.
Well,
and
yeah,
I think that sort of pushed
Linux,
Microsoft in the direction of opening up,
Yeah, if you're in any Linux distro, it pretty much mostly comes pre-installed with the whole LibreOffice suite. Yeah. And yeah, it's
OpenOffice is what I'm thinking about.
OpenOffice preceded Libre.
Right. And yeah, at least, back in the day, there were a lot more compatibility issues, but at this point, you can basically open Microsoft files in the Linux versions. So no more, I want to be on Linux, but people who are on Windows sent me their files and I can't open them. Those days are fortunately becoming mostly gone.
Yeah, when OpenOffice and Libre came along, it solved a lot of problems, just trying to get away from the whole Microsoft, secret programs that you had to have them because you couldn't read the documents otherwise.
Yeah.
So we should talk about some of the things that are going on now with EFF-Austin, particularly. What's happening with EFF-Austin now? What are you focused on?
What are we doing? Well,
I'm supposed to be able to answer that question myself, but I'm pretending on it.
I mean, I'll say one thing we did for the last couple of years was survive COVID, same as everybody else, basically. So, we were sort of, I think we actually did a lot more than a lot of people because we're tech savvy and we all live on the internet.
Yeah, Zoom meetings.
But yeah, I mean, basically, we pivoted to doing Zoom virtual meetings for about 2 years there and keeping our normal monthly meetups going. They've now started up again at Cap Factory again in person, and they still seem to be attended by people. So we still seem to have a community here in Austin who likes we exist and appreciates what we do. Some old faces have come back. Some faces are new. Some people who used to be regulars, I haven't seen them since we've been in person. They may have moved to another city or have lost interest. I don't know. But we still seem to be averaging good attendance of averaging at least 15 people a meetup. So we seem to still be providing the anti-capitalist rabble-rousing meetup at Cap Factory, the startup incubator. So keeping our role there going. So yeah, the meetups. And frankly, probably the most political activism we've done since the 2014 Texas legislative bill fight we were all involved in. Well, I wasn't, it predated my time, but probably the biggest political activism we've done since then, we've been pretty involved in because there's a big debate here going on in Austin right this moment around whether the city should bring back its automated license plate reader program. And we've been involved pretty heavily with a coalition of other groups here in town trying to defeat that.
I was reading that the data from license plate readers, a minuscule amount of that is going to law enforcement. The rest is going to the data brokers. So that seems to be a really dangerous thing.
Well, what are the use cases? What are they using this for?
I can tell you what they claim they want to use it for. And one reason we've actually been somewhat effective in trying to convince some of the city council that they should put a lot more safeguards on this tech if they're going to use it at all. I mean, my perfect world, they wouldn't, but if they're going to use it at all, they need to use safeguards. One reason we've been effective is we haven't just simply said, oh, the people who want this, they don't want to solve any real or legitimate problem. No, they're wanting to solve real problems. Though I think, as our board member Josh keeps putting it, fine, these are real problems, but you want to be targeted in the solution. You want to use a scalpel. Ubiquitous mass surveillance is more like a sledgehammer instead of a scalpel to solve very specific problems. But the real problems the supporters and boosters want to solve with it is they want to solve things like stolen cars, kidnappings, felonies, often with a time-sensitive nature around resolving whatever it is.
They used to have cameras at intersections that would read your license plate. And if you just happen to go through the intersection really fast or through a red light, they would catch you.
Well,
they would send you a letter telling you to send them money.
Yeah, I think actually, ironically, the Texas legislature did away with those cameras in a bill, which is kind of hilarious now that they're fighting to bring them back, but for different reasons.
Yeah. Bastrop County, they had to do away with that as soon as that passed, and they were making big bucks off of that.
Oh yeah. I mean, and of course you get in, there's so many technical issues to get into about the problems with these things, but there've been a lot of studies and audits done on them. And for one thing, up to potentially a third of license plate reads these things do are just wrong. The machine learning visual recognition algorithm just doesn't read the dang license plate correctly, maybe up to a third of them. Also, only 0.1% of the hits actually hit a license plate that is on a hot list for something. And that's even for Class C misdemeanors. That's it's even smaller if you're talking about felonies, but only 0.1% of the hits get a hit if somebody has any kind of thing out on them. And then there's just also the fun issues of do these things even have good or accurate data in them? One thing we've been talking to city council about that can happen is you can and actually there have been cases where this has happened, where like a rental car company will have one of their cars stolen and they'll report it stolen, but they'll neglect to report that oh, actually we found it, never mind, so that license plate is still on the hot list as stolen. It was literally an incident in California where an innocent motorist was driving a rental car and got pulled over at gunpoint by police because they'd clearly stolen this car.
Yeah, the poster child for bad license plate data is TexTag. They've had some seriously bad PR going on because they were sending people bills for stuff that they had already paid for, and they were claiming that their license plate was going through some reader, and it wasn't.
Well, it gets even better because apparently part of one of the things that the boosters want these for is apparently, we've already had an epidemic in Texas of like, so we, due to COVID and everything, we had a massive backlog on people being able to get their new license plates for their vehicles. So everybody started driving around in paper plates because, they couldn't get the official ones, and you have to have a plate of some kind. The paper ones are legal if you in good faith haven't been able to get your official ones yet. Well, it turns out paper ones are really easy to forge. So a bunch of people in the state have been driving around with fake forged paper plates, or even expired ones, whatever. And people finally got fed up because they're just like, well, the car is right there breaking the law. Why aren't the police doing something about it? So finally the police started cracking down on this not too long ago. And so these thieves changed tactics where apparently they're now literally stealing license plates off people's cars and putting them on their cars. And it's sending people toll bills when the people with the stolen plates drive on the toll road. This is one of the things they say that they think ALPRs could help actually stop. And in fairness to them, when I spoke with our colleagues at EFF about this, the ALPR expert there, Dave Moss, replied back saying like, well, that's like one of the only use cases where there's like, one could argue that's a legitimate use of the technology if you could somehow eliminate all the dangerous externalities of the technology as far as a surveillance tool. At least wanting to use it for that is not total BS.
Have you been following?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, have you been following EFF's investigations about this location data broker, Data Science?
Oh yeah, I literally just heard about this.
People.
Yeah, this Data Fog or whatever the name of this
Fog
company.
Data Science is the name of the company.
I literally learned about this today, so I don't have anything smart or interesting to say. But yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. Third-party data markets are incredibly unregulated. Like, it's been known for a long time that the big loophole in the Supreme Court Carpenter decision around that police can't directly request cell phone tower location data on cell phones. Well, the big loophole was there was nothing preventing the cell phone companies from selling that location data to data brokers. The police could just buy it off the data broker. So the fact that there's this ubiquitous cobbled together location data from data brokers search engine cops are using, I'm in no way surprised to learn this.
This is why I use an iPhone, not an Android phone, because Apple at least gives you power to control which apps can track your data when. And so, any app that requests access to my location data when I'm not using the app, nope, denied. Can't do that on Android. And it's a huge problem. Apple's
pretty good on privacy overall.
Yeah,
considering
they do seem to be.
They do a lot of good stuff. I am so much of a nerd on privacy issues that I could give you a nice long list of where Apple isn't good on privacy, but they do a lot of good stuff. It is true.
Well, it's not like, I mean, we had that thing recently where Google was reacting to the fact that a guy captured a picture of his son's genitals.
Yeah, he had an infection.
Yeah, because of an infection. I mean, they were trying to get a diagnosis.
It's during COVID. He had to send a pic of it to the doctor. They had to do remote telemedicine.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And he got in trouble, right? Because they notified the authorities. Yeah. Yeah. Tell us about that. I think you posted something about that.
Yeah, I learned about it because our good friend Corey blasted it on Pluralistic. But yeah, I mean, apparently Google's, sexually explicit material algorithms that look for, child exploitation imagery, had flagged the image because he auto synced with Google Photos. And basically he was all in on Google as far as like everything he did with his life was with Google services. Google shut down his emails, his cell phone, because he was with Google Fi, like his YouTube account, his Google Photos account. Like they literally shut all his accounts. And then he finds out that without telling him, they sent literally every digital file of his they had to the police. And he only found out about this because the police mailed him this big dossier telling him, because they'd shut down his phone plan. So the police couldn't even call him to tell him, oh, by the way, Google sent us all this stuff. And the crazy thing in stories like this, you're always ready for the cops or law enforcement to be the bad guys. They're not the bad guys here. They very quickly figured out this guy is a normal dude. He's not a child molester. But even with the cops telling Google, you made a mistake, Google won't restore any of his accounts.
Didn't they eventually restore them?
Well, last I checked Corey's story, which was posted recently, no, they had not. Corey was partially publishing the story to try to boost signal so enough people scream at Google he might get his stuff back. I hope he has.
I mean, there's this tension between the potential legitimate law enforcement uses of what I guess you'd say surveillance, of monitoring might be a softer word for it, versus on the one hand, mistakes that can be made, and then on the other hand, where there could be just actual misuses where you're just basically spying on people.
I mean, one issue I thought this case highlighted really well is we often hear people going like, well, the problem is just they rely too much on AI moderation and the AIs are dumb and they don't know. And if you had enough humans on it, well, they could use human judgment. But the point I thought this case really illustrated is there are times where you can't know what's going on even as a human being if all you have is a single picture with no other data or context or information to go on. Like the pictures that got this guy flagged, with just the picture, you have no way of knowing if that's a normal, loving family in the privacy of their home or if something bad or nefarious is going on. Right. You literally can't tell just from that picture.
The old a picture is worth 1,000 words, but if they're the wrong words, and it's not really useful.
Well, it really is a case where human judgment is really required, and human judgment is expensive. So they really don't want to put a human in there. But sooner or later, I mean, we can't really, this is the issue with AI. To what extent can you trust artificial intelligence systems to be discerning? And really, they're not very discerning,
Well, John, I hear Google's got a sentient one. Why don't we ask it its thoughts?
Yeah, and you have the whole problem of built-in bias. The people making that program may have a bias that is coded into the AI. So that's
well, even if the people making it aren't biased themselves and their code isn't biased, if it's trained on a biased training data set, which it inevitably will be because human society is biased, you get biased AIs that replicate our prejudices.
I'm going to shift gears to something else, seeing that we're starting to be low on time. Because Kevin, I know you can speak to this. I saw an application today called, I think it's called Reach. And do you know what I'm talking about?
Maybe.
This is a system for that you can basically import your contacts and have those compared to voter files, and basically pull the voter file, get the voter file information for anybody that you've entered, as a contact. And you get all the data from their voter file. You can see how they voted, and you can see.
Now, thank you for bringing this to my attention, because maybe I've heard this in passing, but I actually was not super familiar with this one. But yeah, given I'm in the political tech space, I should learn a lot more about what this thing does or doesn't. I mean, I can tell you, yeah, voter files are very hot data sets in this space. You know, they are guarded preciously by the companies that own them, I'll tell you.
But aren't they considered public information?
I mean, they are, but you know, it's scattered everywhere. Like, a lot of the value is it's all been put in a single database.
Oh, so a company pulls a bunch of voter files together, and the value of their offering is that they have made that aggregation of files.
Essentially, I mean, there's a company in this space called Phoenix that sells a lot of access to this data, but they're not. There's issues with Phoenix because it's very expensive, the service, and I've not ever used it, but I've been told by people who have used it that its interface is horrible. It takes a lot of time and training to get a volunteer to understand how to actually get any useful information out of all that information on the voters, basically. So it's all set up for like big state or national campaigns that have deep war chests and can pay for Phoenix and pay for the training. It's almost useless for somebody who just wants to run for school board. Actually, fixing that problem is a lot of what my company tries to work on, actually.
I've
The que- the-
experienced the bad data that's been given to a lot of political campaigns, because during the last primary, I got all sorts of robocalls and direct calls from the candidates themselves from counties that are way far away from where I am. Someone just sold this poor fool a list of particular Democratic voters, and they just call them up. They go, "Well, I'm running for county commissioner. Now you come and vote." It's like, I don't
Yeah,
live
I mean,
anywhere near you.
a data set is only as good as how clean and maintained and pristine it is. And yes, that is the reason oftentimes certain companies can command a premium in this space, because they've done the work of trying to sanitize these massive data sets to mostly be correct and not have useless information in them.
Well, what we
Yeah.
were talking about today is this idea of the existence of public information that is publicly accessible and probably should be, but on the other hand, it contains data that has privacy implications.
Mm. I mean, and
Like you can see how somebody voted, for instance.
right. I mean, the truth is, I remember right before COVID, one of EFF's lawyers, David Green, came, and we had an event with him, and he gave a talk. And he really, I thought, put something that is at the heart of so many of the debates that are all around the sort of digital civil liberties activism we do. And it was so obvious once he said it, but he just put it so crystal clear, where he's like, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment actually contradict each other. Total freedom of speech means there's no privacy, and total privacy means there's no freedom of speech.
Right. But I want to go back to something from a few years ago when I was knocking on doors for a congressional representative campaign. I went and I knocked on this guy's door, and went into the spiel about the candidate, and he's like, "Why do you Democrats keep coming and knocking on my door? I don't understand it. I do not understand why you keep knocking on my door and bothering me. I hate you fuckers." Sorry about that. and he and I said, "Well, sir, the data here on my phone shows that you voted in the Democratic primary." He said, "Yeah, I vote in every Democratic primary because I go find the craziest person that I can find, and I vote for them so that maybe someday I'll get lucky and there'll be somebody just so crazy that they can't win the election."
Garbage in,
Yeah.
garbage out.
So you're telling me he had piloted the now dim strategy of trying to elect the crazy Trump cultists so that they'll lose in the general.
Yeah, which is not guaranteed at this point in my book.
I think that's an incredibly risky strategy, but that's a
Yeah.
whole nother conversation.
But anyway, it was really, really funny because there was also a countervailing great success, because I'm walking up to the store and there just the pickup truck in the driveway has an NRA ILA sticker. I ring the doorbell plays Dixie, and
That's never a good sign.
Ruh-roh.
I'm thinking, well, this may be my last day on Earth, and but the software said I needed to go here, so I'll do what the software says. And so I ring the guy's doorbell and I say, hey, I'm Chris Boyd. I'm here with the so-and-so campaign. He's like, oh, I love that guy. He's the guy. He's the military guy, right? Yeah. That's the guy. And he's like, oh yeah, I am so glad you knocked on my door because I am going to vote for him. I'm going to vote for him in the primary. I'm going to vote for him in general. I am so glad that you're here and so glad that you guys are out there, doing the work and trying to get this guy elected. Like, okay, thank you very much for your support.
Did you ever figure out the answer to the riddle of why he had all that stuff and was so pro this candidate?
Okay, so yes, I did. And so the guy I was working for was a retired lieutenant colonel, and he did, I think, 2 or 3 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. And the guy whose door I knocked on was Army vet as well. And just he thought that, Chip Roy was an evil human being and didn't care about the troops. And so he was
he's not.
Now I know who you were working for.
You're right, right.
Yeah.
So
who should have won, by the way?
Who should have won? He came within what, 2.5, 3 points.
I mean, full disclosure. I mean, EFF-Austin's past, we actually put together a candidate forum with the anonymous, but you can easily find out who we're talking about individual, along with a few other people who had tech backgrounds who were running for political office. And yes,
I remember that.
And yes, I did. He definitely should have won because, I mean, Chip Roy is in the running for worst person in Congress. So, yeah.
Yeah, we actually covered that your forum that you had at the Irish bar.
Oh yeah, B.D. Riley's, may it rest in peace. Well, the Mueller one's still there, but the 6th one's gone.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, well, we'll certainly
changing.
Oh, it is. But I work from home now, so I mostly don't see the changes. I just sit in my office and code.
Yeah, so since I work for a state agency, I have to go into the office 2 days a week, and I need to wander over to 6th Street and see what's in the B.D. Riley space at this point.
I mean, B.D. Riley's is one of the only places on that street that made me not want to gag, so probably not an improvement.
Yeah, it's all shot bars now.
Yeah, Astor's Follies is still there. They're still fun.
They're still there, but you don't have B.D. Riley's, you don't have the Ritz, you don't have Easy Tiger. The number of non-terrible places has dropped a lot.
Yeah, right. But so I don't know. I really like Eureka.
Wait.
Been there.
Is that on 6 now?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, I have not been there. The reason I was asking is because a friend of mine has on East Cesar Chavez a new project called the Eureka Room that actually will be profiling at the October meetup. So I was like, "Ooh, Eureka!"
Yeah, so Eureka is I think they're a California-based chain, but they do really, really good high-end pub grub.
Okay.
And they have an amazing variety of whiskeys at their bar, including the hyper rare, I can't remember the name now, Garrison Brothers Blue Label.
Oh yeah,
Garrison Brothers Blue Label. If one,
I've had some of that
one
before.
who enjoys good whiskeys and is intrigued was to wander in there, how much was that going to set me back?
I think about $35 for a 1.5 ounce pour, but this was right before COVID, and I was a regular lunch customer, and so the bartender gave me a 1/4 ounce taste of it for free.
Aw.
I wonder if we could charge them for advertising.
Yeah, good luck on that.
We're down to 2 minutes. This is the 2-minute warning.
All
You
right.
guys have any wrap up comments?
I'll just say we've had a lot of good progress making the city council's ALPR resolution 1,000 times better than it was, with way more safeguards, especially thanks to Councilmember Vella, who really is the hero of this story. So, I guess I'll just tell people, they haven't voted on it yet. There's still going to be debate, as, I'm sure there's pushback because the people who want this won't want all Vella's protections. So I'll just say to anybody listening, write your council members, tell them that you support the work Vella's been doing and you want safeguards.
Yep.
Assuming we do it at all, which we're going to, I think, because there's too many people who want it. So we're trying to make it as safe as we possibly can.
And when's the next meeting?
I don't know. I mean, I literally spoke earlier today. You can go listen to the KUTX news blurb today, and they pulled my quote to council for the story, basically.
Oh, that's great.
Nice.
Well, we are out of time. And this has been a wonderful conversation.
All right.
We will see you guys the next time we do this.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Scoop. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good to see all of you.
You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. With John Lubkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.